Okay, Year 11, welcome to your very first video tutorial for 8.1.1 social and ethical issues. We are going to look at the evolution of software applications. The first syllabus dot point says evolution of software applications, and these are these sub dot points: command line interfaces, GUI interfaces, search engines, VisiCalc, web browsers, presentation software, email, and social networking are the milestones that we are going to look at today. So in a moment, we're going to go into some background, but essentially we are looking at today, how has software evolved? So our really big question that we're going to tackle is, how did we get here? Where did we come from? What were the big milestones along the way, and what does it look like now? So just a bit of background. I don't know, this might seem really obvious probably to a lot of you, but software is defined as the programs and other operating information used by a computer. Basically, the way in which I, as a user, interact with the hardware. And again, double obvious, software has evolved dramatically since the consumerization of computers in the late 1960s. That's a fancy way of saying software has evolved since computers have really become common in our society. So, where did we start? This is probably going to be very foreign to a lot of you, but back in the good old days, there was no buttons to click, there was no mouse to use, there was just a keyboard. For some of you super nerds who have done some quote unquote hacking of the mainframe, you probably would have used command line or a CLI to do it. So command line interfaces were basically the first interface. And while we're here, an interface is something that connects two different things, so connects the user to the hardware. That was what a CLI was, and it was a text-based interface, basically allowed the user to interact with the computer. What you would do in this particular interface is type in commands, and that would run a particular task on the computer. Typically, they were black background, white text, and basically you respond by typing in a prompt or typing in a command. And what you get back was either a success or a non-success, a table, a list, or some kind of confirmation. Okay, but very, very different from what we know today. You can still access command line interfaces. If you are using Windows, you can run CMD and hit enter and you will get Windows command line. If you are on OS X, you can go up to the top right hand corner to Spotlight and type in terminal, and you'll get another command line interface. So in the land of IT, we use command line interfaces a lot of the time to troubleshoot and to run certain scripts and programs. So from command line interfaces, obviously as computers became more popular and will start to be used by the average Joe, command line interfaces really didn't hack it. So the graphic user interface, or the GUI, was born. Now, this is really brief here, but you guys later on will be going into we'll be completing an activity where you look at the GUI and the evolution of the GUI in a lot more detail. But in terms of the second, the second really big benchmark in terms of how software has evolved was the introduction of the GUI. So this one here on the left was very early OS X. So that's the operating system or the software that runs on Apple Macintosh computers. So really, pretty basic, but it was the first kind of thing that allowed the user to click on a button, actually interact with the computer in a way that was more accessible. Nowadays, GUIs are incredibly detailed and have whole lots of functionality and features that weren't originally available. Unlike with CLIs or command line interfaces, you have a mouse and you're actually able to, and a keyboard, and you use both to interact and achieve tasks. Again, a little bit more obvious, but the next, I suppose, lamp post along the way is the evolution of search engines. So, search engines are pretty straightforward, but they're software applications used to locate information and files stored on the internet. Search engines themselves have evolved dramatically since the start of time. So for most of you guys, it has become a verb, or it's become very colloquial to say, oh, Google that. And that is synonymous with, search for something. Why don't you just Google that? Now, Google is one of the most powerful search engines that currently exists. However, back in the day, it wasn't the only one that existed. So if you're really interested in looking at the evolution of these things, you can actually search up a range of original search engines. And if you go back to Wayback Time Machine, you can have a look at the evolution of search engines such as AltaVista, Netscape Navigator, Ask Jeeves, AOL. I'll put a link on Canvas if for any of you that are interested in that. The next really big, another really big lamppost in the evolution of software applications was VisiCalc. Now, if you're looking at this picture here going, yeah, cool, that doesn't really look like it's everything too evolutionary, let me put a bit of context on this for you. So back in the day when GUIs, so just after command line interfaces, but GUIs were just really, really basic and just starting to evolve, two guys from Harvard created this piece of software called VisiCalc. Now, VisiCalc was the first spreadsheet computer program invented in 1978. So for 1978, this was pretty hardcore. Before VisiCalc, really, it was just the super nerds and a couple of, computer hobbyists that really were able to interact with the PC. It was kind of, a clicky, fun thing to do. With the introduction of VisiCalc and, arguably the first big software application, people were able to, track budgets, track spending, and it kind of turned the computer or the personal computer from being just that something for fun to actually something that I could possibly use in my business. That it actually started to change the way in which people thought of and viewed the computer. So it was one of the first software pieces that really changed the way in which users interacted with hardware. Web browsers. So in terms of being able to access and display web pages, web browsers are another piece of software. I put the Mighty Four, one of which is, dead, which is ironic. But Google, Mozilla Firefox, Safari, Opera, Internet Explorer, for which I cannot remember its current new name. I think it has a new name, but who really cares? Web browsers are all pieces of software that allow a user to connect with web pages. So as a user, I access a web browser, I type in a URL, that web browser goes to wherever that content is stored, either in the cloud or at a physical location, on that web server, and then pulls down the page and displays it on my device. So web browsers are essentially a middleman. They're a middleman to connect the web server and to connect me. These ones are also kind of straightforward, but look, I'll touch base on them anyway. Specific applications that really evolved were spreadsheets and presentation software. So, like VisiCalc obviously started the spreadsheet revolution, but as software started to evolve, so did the introduction of sheets that actually had software that actually had particular functions. So spreadsheets are used as financial and calculation tools, and it really meant that people were able to implement personal computers in business. Nowadays, just as a side note, ironically, people use spreadsheets for things other than calculations, and as semi-databases. But yeah, the spreadsheets have evolved and really have changed the way in which people have interacted with hardware, as did presentation software. So, finally, I no longer had to rely on the overhead projector, or handwritten documents. I was able to actually make PowerPoint presentations or, actually market my business using my personal computer or using the hardware with the aid of this software tool. And last but not least, social networking. Social networking applications have changed the way in which users interact with, have changed the way in which users interact with each other. Essentially, social networking tools as a software evolution are really user-generated content, as opposed to, that kind of 2D world of presentation software and that kind of stuff, where you just put your, your ideas or your budget or something on it, whereas social networking tools actually allow for the connections, the relationships, and the interaction through a software platform. So really, social networking has changed the way in which we as developers have to program and what we have to consider, as well as the way in which users actually interact with platforms. So if you go back and have a look, we started off with command line interfaces. They were the first software. And then, slowly but surely, GUIs got introduced. And as a GUI became available, VisiCalc was developed, and some of the first search engines started popping up in the late 80s, early 90s through different web browsers. Presentation software started, email started, and in the current last 15 years, social networking applications have got here. So that is dot point one, the evolution of software applications.